Hi there. It seems that in the age of digital technology, automated processes, and computer systems, the human factor is excluded. And indeed it is. If it is human nature to make mistakes due to physical exertion and fatigue, then a digital program is devoid of these shortcomings. But is this really the case, or are there exceptions? Dan Saunders, an ordinary bartender from Australia, proved the opposite. This story will be a struggle with himself and his temptations. After all, Dan is one of the few who managed in just a few days to turn from an ordinary hard worker into a rich man. So what happened? I'm going to tell you about it today. The guy was 29 years old. At that time, he worked as an ordinary bartender and couldn't boast of a luxurious lifestyle. He worked for 12 hours for a small salary and didn't even dream of beautiful cars and yachts. But his life changed in an instant when a few years ago, he was faced with what happens only in Hollywood films. It all started in February 2011, when Dan had a drink at a bar late at night and went outside to get some cash. He put the card in the ATM, but when he saw he only had $3 in his account, he tried to transfer $100 from his credit account to his savings account and then withdraw it. However, the ATM reported a transaction error. Dan later said, quote, "I was about to collect the card, but I saw that the ATM issued the money. I couldn't believe my eyes. I tried to get $250 and then $300 just to see what happens, and the ATM continued to give me money. It was 1 a.m. in a provincial town, so I went back to the bar and continued to drink," end quote. Returning home from the bar at night, he passed by the same ATM. Then he decided to crank up his trick again and see if it worked out again. Dan transferred different amounts of money from one of his accounts to another, and the ATM again gave them back to him, notifying of a transaction error. Quote, "I think it was a combination of intoxication and boredom, but I just went beyond the limits of the possible and tried again and again," he said. The next morning, he thought that he had dreamed all of this, but then he found money in his wallet. And then he checked the balance on the savings account that he had at the ATM and found out that he owed $2,000 and he withdrew $4,000. So this allowed the bartender to make a new discovery. He said, "I figured out that there's a difference between what the ATM gives me and what is on my savings account. This meant that no matter how much I spent, I could cover the difference by simply transferring from my credit account to the savings one. I could simply create money, making transfers between 1 and 3 in the morning, when, as I understood it, the ATMs updated the system," end quote. Thus, Dan realized that he always needed to be one step ahead of the ATM. One day he received $2,000, and the next day he transferred $4,000. All of his numbers then doubled due to a system failure, and the transfer takes place at night, returning the next day. But if you're ahead of this return by making another transfer, you can trick the system into thinking that you have millions. And that is exactly what he did and what happened. So in short, an error in the operation of the ATM allowed him to withdraw an unlimited amount of money, regardless of whether it was in the account or not. As Dan later recalled, he said, quote, "One time I just went to the bank and they told me I had 1 million in my account, and it was something incredible. I couldn't even believe that this was possible at all. But the manager himself didn't see the movements or that there was any kind of error with the money. I just received different amounts into the account every single day after I transferred money from one account into another," end quote. Learning how to get money out of nowhere, Dan turned into a real Gatsby. He threw luxurious parties, paid friends' college bills, rented private planes, and in general refused nothing to himself. He noticed that the presence of a lot of money changed the attitude of people towards him. He said, "I remember how one day I came to the bank to withdraw a certain amount. A beautiful girl stood next to me at the counter. I made it so that she saw my balance, and the millions did their job. After 10 minutes, we were going to my place," end quote. In Dan's inner circle, opinions regarding his magic trick were mixed. Some of his friends were sure that he should stop and didn't want to participate in it anymore. Others, however, were only too happy to become part of his new luxurious life. The bartender didn't inform his family about his sudden wealth, as he knew and suspected that his family wouldn't approve of this newfound wealth. However, Dan's luxurious life was marred by nightmares. He was very afraid of being caught. He said, "One night I had a nightmare. A special forces detachment was standing at the door of my room in the hotel where I was staying. I woke up in a sweat and realized that it was just a dream, but then they knocked on my door. Then I thought, that's all. They came for me. But it turned out that it was just a maid. If you do the right thing for most of your life and then begin to do something wrong, your body goes crazy. I even had panic attacks. When the phone rang, I always answered. I think a small part of me wanted it to end, but I already passed the point of no return and couldn't stop," end quote. A little later, he was fired from work. No, he hadn't left his job. He actually wanted to have at least some kind of cover, but leading a loose lifestyle, he was constantly late to it. And a few days later, his girlfriend left him too. But Saunders continued to flaunt his imaginary wealth, introducing himself as an investment banker and wasting tens of thousands of dollars on 5-star hotels, buying Hugo Boss clothing, and an elite escort. In April of the same year, Dan went by helicopter with 2 girls from an escort agency to the Blue Mountains on the east coast of Australia to spend a week there and live at a resort worth $2,000 a day. But the most extravagant waste of money was the charter of a 20-seat plane to a private island near Bali, which cost him almost $100,000. He spent part of the money on altruism, paying for the training of friends and sending a friend to study in France. He said, "For me, it was not about money, it was about the journey." It may be difficult to believe, but this went on for 6 months. Unlimited money for half a year, can you imagine that? But then, the anxious Dan decided to stop. Maybe he was just tired of everything. Standing in front of a mirror in a 5-star hotel, in the most expensive room, he ultimately looked at his reflection and could not recognize himself. Who are you? What are you worth? Are you Dan from Australia, whom your parents taught to live honestly? Or are you like a guy in a movie, who's going to disappear with millions one day? What will happen to you and your family then? He said, quote, "I didn't want to leave my family. I didn't want to leave my house and loved ones and all my life and hide from the secret services. And I probably wouldn't have enough brains for that." End quote. From that day on, Dan stopped making transactions at the ATM and soon he contacted the bank, after which he was informed that the police would now have to deal with this case. The bartender had $8 million in cash and a huge gym bag. He arrived in an ordinary taxi and entering, simply gave this money to a bank branch. Everyone was at a total loss. The branch, it was even closed for the whole day. No one could believe what was happening. This guy just brings $8 million in a bag and says, "Please take it, it's yours." But to his surprise, the next 2 years he lived a normal life with no one trying to talk to him, no one touching him. He didn't even receive any news on his case. It was as if everyone had forgotten about him. But still Dan lived on pins and needles. He couldn't sleep normally, couldn't just relax. The thoughts in his head constantly shifted from whether he had acted correctly and how it would end. To cope with anxiety, which was intensifying, he even turned to a psychiatrist, and he couldn't find a specialist the first time. He said, "I felt I should talk to someone about this. The first psychiatrist I met said, 'Sorry, I'm not qualified enough for your case.' After that, he even gave several interviews and stories about him appeared on national television. Dan had a backup plan just in case he decided not to give up to the police. He decided that he was going to move to Spain, to Mallorca, having previously placed his money not in a bank, but in a casino. Because at a casino, such organizations don't really share information about their customers. It's a policy. But he still ended up changing his mind. In 2015, the case finally came to court. He said, "I was just sure that I was about to be punished, and I would be held behind bars until the end of my days." But, to my surprise, the court was very strange. Nobody really understood what law I had violated. Not the judge, not the prosecutor. The bank provided little evidence and Dan pleaded guilty. As a result, he received a year in prison, after which he left safely in 2016 and carried out community service for another 18 months. In total, Dan managed to spend $2 million on a luxurious life. Now, at the time of this video, Dan still works in the bar. His salary is $22 per hour, and it wasn't easy for him to return to normal after the life of a millionaire and time in prison. In an interview with one of the TV channels, Dan said that he did not regret what had happened. He said, quote, "Of course, sometimes life may seem a little mundane and boring after what I experienced, but that's fine. Even in ordinary life, you can find a lot of joy. And most importantly, now I sleep peacefully and don't flinch away from every rustle." End quote. This experience helped Dan to learn an important lesson. He realized that when faced with temptation, it's easy to lose your true face. But he still believes that he did the right thing when he confessed and returned all the money. The story of Dan Saunders is more like a movie, and it proves once again that life sometimes creates stories on par with even Hollywood screenwriters. So, what would you do if you had this money and you were in his place? Be sure to write your opinion down below in the comment section. And of course, don't forget to hit that like button if you like this video. Thanks for watching, subscribe for more.